Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. This is the 15th of August and hopefully you survived Friday the 13th. As always, if this is useful, a like, subscribe, comment and share really is appreciated, and hit that bell icon. New videos this week. So I finally got around to starting the DevOps Masterclass. So I posted the first part of the Masterclass, the foundation. This is really covering kind of the key principles, spending a bit of extra time about some of the core methodologies and workflows we'll see before diving into kind of the deeper modules that will continue the class. And I also did a deep dive about Windows 365, really what it is and how it compares to things like Azure Virtual Desktop. So you can go and check those out. So new updates this week. So on the compute side, the automatic Azure VM extension upgrade capability has gone GA. So remember, extensions are things we can add to virtual machines and therefore virtual machine scale sets that add some type of capability to the virtual machine. They're normally pretty small, but now what can happen is the publisher of that extension, if they release a new version, it will automatically be applied to the virtual machines, to the virtual machine scale sets. This is for Windows and Linux, and it does follow the standard kind of availability first principles, i.e. it's not just going to roll it out everywhere at once. There's like groups of regions deployed, and those groups of regions are never the paired regions. There were obviously pairings of regions for DR. They would never hit both at the same time. Then within a region, it's kind of availability zone at a time, and then update domains at a time. For virtual machine scale set, never more than 20% of them at a time. And if it's not healthy after 5 minutes, it gets rolled back. So I can now turn this on kind of on that per extension basis. And GitHub actually released their Codespaces. This is now GA. So the idea here is that, hey, I have some repo in GitHub. I can now just launch an environment and I can access that directly through the browser using kind of the VS Code for the browser, or I can hook into it from VS Code running locally on my desktop, but it's actually being powered by essentially a VM in Azure, a Linux VM in Azure running a container that has this complete now clone of my repo, a whole set of tooling, a set of extensions. There's a whole set of different languages it supports. I could customize that image if I want to. And I can select different sizes that obviously cost me a different amount of money on a kind of per second billing. But that is now actually GA, so it's now super simple to go and just get an environment that will have my repo just cloned to it. You can see it's saying, hey, up to 32 cores and 64 gigabytes of memory. And there's both a browser experience, there's that VS Code running in the browser, or it can just be from VS Code on your desktop, going and connecting to that code space where all the actual compilation and the tools would actually be running, not kind of resources on my local machine. But we can see all the different options there, standard environments, you can do the customized ones, all the different languages, builds. Here's the different sizes of kind of machines you can actually leverage for that. But it's really making it super simple. I think they talk about kind of 10 seconds, and this thing will kind of just be up and running for you. So pretty crazy and simple to use. Obviously, you pay for it based on the size of that machine. On the networking side, so I can now resize a virtual network that is peered. So if you remember, the whole point of peering is, hey, I have a virtual network, and that virtual network is a certain address space. Maybe it's 10.1.0.0/16. And when I peer it to other virtual networks, once I do that, I couldn't change this address space. I couldn't maybe add another CIDR range to it. I would have to break the peer, resize it. So now, hey, maybe I'm adding 10.3 to it as well. And then I would re-add the peer again. So what this feature in preview lets you do is actually on the peering object, it's adding 2 additional properties. There's kind of a remote virtual network address space property, which is its current known address space of that remote VNet. and basically a property that says, what's the peering sync level? Are we up to date? And if it's not up to date, what I now can perform is from the portal or from PowerShell, I perform a sync. So I'll actually now go and update the address spaces based on what has changed. Now it is in preview. I have to go and enable a feature flag to start using this functionality. And I'll put a link in the description below to that actual article if you want to start trying that out. That's an exciting one. There are some new ExpressRoute Global Reach locations. So this is South Africa, Johannesburg only, and Taiwan. Remember, the whole point of Global Reach is that idea that, hey, I have kind of my location. Maybe I have multiple locations. And there's that great big Microsoft backbone WAN network. And at certain points, that network kind of expands into these meet me locations. So that's where I can extend my network to, normally to connect to all the different kind of, wrong color, all the different Azure services that connect on that backbone network as well. What Global Reach lets me do is actually say, hey, I actually want to be able to connect to my other location via that Microsoft backbone network through that connection I have. So that's what Global Reach does. So now added additional meet me's that allow me to actually go and use Global Reach. And the Azure Point-to-Site VPN client for macOS has gone GA. This is the one that has the native Azure AD support, also certificate-based and radius for the OpenVPN protocol. Really the big deal for this is the Azure AD support. Now I can use things like conditional access that can drive things like Azure AD MFA. So that is now GA. Miscellaneous. So Azure Site Recovery now has global disaster recovery support. Remember, Azure Site Recovery is the ability to replicate kind of from within the guest OS to another region. Now, historically, that other region had to be in the same geopolitical boundary, for example, North America. Then they added the ability to kind of come within that. I could replicate from an AZ to an AZ. Now, for a global organization, I can actually now replicate to pretty much any region globally. There are a few restricted regions. If we actually go and look at the article, it now does talk about, hey, look, Azure Site Recovery enables me to perform global disaster recovery. I can replicate between any two Azure regions in the world. So I'm not limited to those geopolitical boundaries anymore. And it kind of talks about, hey, there's the geographic cluster of America, Europe, etc. And then it does say down the bottom, and again, I'll link to this in the description, where there are some restrictions on where I can actually replicate to. So potentially you want to go and check that out. Just make sure it's not going to cause you any problems. Azure Migrate now has containerization support. So if I think about Azure Migrate, I have some workload, and normally we migrate it to a virtual machine. That's a fairly simple process. A lot of these workloads could actually go to a container. Remember, a container gives me a bit more flexibility, lower overhead. So what this app containerization capability lets me do is now modernize my ASP.NET and my Java web applications if they're running on Apache Tomcat. So it's kind of a point and containerize approach. It will actually go and scan the workload. It will understand and create Docker files to actually create a container for what it has detected when it performs that scan. And it will actually use the Azure Container Registry to go and perform that build and then store it. So obviously the Azure Container Registry can do more than just store. It can actually do the builds as well. So it's going to leverage it for that component. But what this is really going to let me do is kind of that re-platform exercise directly through the Azure Migrate experience. It also does other things. It looks at the various parameters I might have. I can do some external file system dependencies. It will understand those, persistent volumes. It can hook into things like App Insights as part of that containerization. I can opt to use Azure Key Vault as part of the process. or it can use the Kubernetes or App Service Plan native secret or application settings. Obviously, both AKS and App Service Plans can actually run containers. So those will be the target platforms for this container that the Azure Migrate can actually create for me. Obviously, it's creating a bunch of artifacts. It's creating those Docker files and other things. So what I can actually then do is those Docker files and other artifacts I could then use in my own CI/CD pipelines to do further building, refinement, whatever I want to do. A new distributed denial of service attack trend report was published. So this is just kind of an interesting thing. So if you go and look at this report, for Q1 and Q2, it kind of goes through the attack trends they're seeing. And it's just really kind of interesting to talk about the number of attacks they're seeing, the amount of bandwidth it's kind of leveraging, the typical attack durations. You actually see they're kind of pretty short for a lot of them. The durations by quarter, the top types of attacks, so UDP, floods, TCP, talks about actually the attacked regions, poor old US, destinations by month, where are the actually sources of the attacks, so US attacking itself, and then if there's new types of attacks observed. So it's just kind of an interesting report just to see what's going really on in the world of distributed denial of service. So again, link in the description below. And that is it. So I hope that was useful. As always, some nice things they've kind of put out there. Any links I've referenced, please be, they're in the description below. Check that out. Until next week, take care, and I'll see you then.